Tēnei te mihi, kia koutou katoa, tēnei ahau, whakanui ana te wiki o te reo Māori, nō reira, tēnā koutou, atamari and good morning. I would like to declare the meeting open and apologise for the slightly late start. We've just been doing a little bit of organising and recognition of Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori, and we're going to be having Member Wilcox speaking in Te Reo quite appropriately, and we're just organising translation and how that translation will work. So the wonderful Rama Ormsby will translate for Member Wilcox, and then we have backup should we need advice on the kind of legal translations that may be required for amendments and motions to be designed. So we are, I think this is one of those that we might need to just work out as we go, and I'm delighted that we're able to do that in this committee. And I'd also like to particularly acknowledge Rama for stepping in at the last moment, so warmest of welcomes. Just to talk about how the day will work, it is a very full agenda, so as usual members, I'm going to ask us to focus on the issues in hand. We are going to have a bit of public input. We're going to hear from Stephen Browning and Bronwyn Turner. We're then going to move the faux walkway item up to be taken after the 6, 7, 8 and have that before item 9. And then the rest of the paper will proceed as normal. We have, however, withdrawn item number 18, which is the classification of Putiki Reserve, as requested by Member Wilcox and discussed with staff, because we have more consultation to do. And we've organised, hopefully, to hear from our Disability and Seniors Advisory panels about 2:30. So we're going to try and work towards that. Otherwise, in between all of that, anything may happen and often does.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Councillor Casey.
Just on that note, there's an issue that's coming up in public excluded called indicative business case for community facilities. It's my belief that that's not all confidential. I understand that the the figures might be confidential, but there's no way on earth the 5 options shouldn't be debated in public, because it has implications for other wards like my own Albert Eden ward.
So for that reason, Councillor, and we've discussed this at length, it is going to be held in confidence because we do want to be able to talk numbers. We're going to be having the faux local board chair, Tracy Mulholland, come and address that, and then we'll work out from there as this proceeds, and it will proceed through the LTP in complete transparency, but we need to be able to talk about this in the first instance.
The faux local board is here, but the Albert Eden local board isn't, because it's in confidential and I couldn't make the phone call.
And it's in confidence,
so that's not
because
fair.
We are starting to bring together the business case, and this is a regional issue, it's not a board-by-board issue.
It's a regional issue with local implications for neighbouring boards, especially for some of the options that are under discussion.
And you're warmly welcome to raise that absolutely at the item, Councillor.
So do you agree then that everything that's written in the pink pages is confidential? Because I disagree, and that's not fair under the Local Government Act. The public must know what we're discussing, and we're discussing options, and the options are not listed.
Okay, I hear what you're saying, Councillor, and at the moment we will keep this in confidence, but as you'll note in the paper that there have been discussions with the local boards and the surrounding local boards, and there will continue to be those discussions. So let's move on. We've got apologies from Councillor Cooper and Councillor Lee. We've also got Councillor Denise Lee and Councillor Sayers, who are on council business. Do we have anyone else? No?
Early departure.
Sorry, Councillor Quacks?
Early departure.
And early departure for Councillor Quacks. We'll add that in. So moved, Councillor Filipaina. I'm happy to second that. So I've just been talking to our translator. We're going to have a go. Te ngō katoa e tautoko ana.
Aye.
Ki mai ai.
Aye. Aye.
te honga kareo whakaai, sorry, I can't read the writing, Rama.
Kore
Whakaai, kore mai. All those against? It's passed. Ko mana.
Kia ora.
Thank you. Thank you. Kia ora. That'll teach me for being very last minute and not able to read the handwriting and endeavouring to translate into te reo. We'll get better as we go. So let's move on to the declarations of interest. Any issues anyone wants to raise? No? Confirmation of the minutes from the last meeting. Councillor Filipaina, happy to move. Seconder for that. Councillor Simpson. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Now, petitions, there are none, but we do have public input. So we've got a request for public input from Stephen Browning and Jodie Brunning. Now, I had suggested that Stephen might like to come next month, because just while he makes his way up, welcome Stephen and Jodie. They're wanting to talk about the issue of glyphosate. Councillors and members, we do have this agenda item next month. So we'll have the staff here, we'll have the report back on our weed control process, and we'll also have the report back on glyphosate use. So this is a favour to Stephen. He's actually out of the country next month. So Stephen and Jodie, you have 5 minutes for your presentation, and I'm sure there'll be a couple of questions, but members, I'd like you to save the bulk of that for when we have the staff here and the opportunity to discuss this at length next month. Thank you. Stephen.
Kia ora tātou katoa. Yes, I won't be here next month. I'm retiring as a Member of Parliament at the election, and I'm off to see my family, my whānau, in Melbourne through that time. I would like an extended opportunity for Jodie Brunning and myself to speak, but thank you for this 5 minutes. I have given you the first 25 pages of a very extensive document. It's hopefully has been sent to you as a link as well, of 183 pages, which is a very methodical, very deep analysis of the EPA's review of the carcinogenicity of glyphosate. And you'll recall that, in fact, I appeared in front of most of you ahead of your local body election, where you all came through and said that you were very concerned about glyphosate. I am well aware that the EPA came since, and with a very glitzy PowerPoint presentation, has said that no worries, business as usual everybody, it's unlikely to be a carcinogen. In doing that, they were going against the gold standard around carcinogenicity internationally. It's a gold standard that they've never questioned before. So this inconvenient truth of glyphosate being a probable carcinogen, it is an animal carcinogen. There's more science showing around the carcinogenicity for humans too. But what they came to was a classification 2A, and that did not suit our EPA. So our EPA went and got a single toxicologist, Dr. Wayne Temple, to do a review on it against the 17 experts internationally that had come to that conclusion. So Wayne Temple, along with EPA and MPI editing, came to that conclusion it's unlikely to be a carcinogen. They are patently wrong. They probably acted illegally, and that we'll find out more in due course. But what I'm here to say to you is that you must not rely on the EPA, and this tome of very well supported, this document here shows very, very clearly how they are letting down this council and New Zealanders in terms of carcinogenicity and a range of other issues from glyphosate. Our document, you'll see on page 18, the summary, what we've come to, it relies on that the EPA review relies on predominantly industry science, discounts relevant independent science, uses outdated guidelines, does not consider glyphosate in mixtures or formulations as this council and everybody that uses glyphosate-based herbicides actually uses. We don't use glyphosate on its own, and yet that's all they've based their decision on. It appears to exclude new data from toxicology and cancer biology. It is contrary to Ministry of Health advice, and as I say, it challenges their own world authority, IARC, International Agency for Research on Cancer. It's not been peer-reviewed by a public expert in carcinogenicity, and appears to be heavily influenced by the Ministry for Primary Industries. I want to read a part of an email from the Ministry of Health in response to their request by the EPA to be involved with the editing. They said, "Thank you for sending Dr. Wayne Temple's report and seeking the Ministry's view about the findings of his review. In order for us to meaningfully comment on this report, we need to review the various articles that Wayne has considered in reaching his conclusions," noting that some of them are unpublished. Similarly, we may need to review as well the articles that IARC has reviewed in classifying glyphosate as a Group 2A carcinogen. This is a bigger commitment than originally anticipated when agreeing to review the report, and we are unable to undertake the review due to limited resources. I note that one of Wayne's criticisms is that IARC report ignores an abundance of papers showing that glyphosate is not carcinogenic. The preamble to the IARC's monograph, which is generic for all IARC monographs, clearly outlines how IARC selects studies that are pertinent to the evaluation of carcinogenicity. They go on. Given the international standing of IARC and the expertise and methodology used to undertake these classifications, the Ministry of Health would be reluctant to criticise any classification based on the review of one individual. This would also be seen as a precedent for other classifications and other advice from the World Health Organization and its supporting organisations. If the EPA wishes to review or challenge the IARC classification, this would need to be carefully considered with a detailed methodology and undertaken by an appropriate range of experts recognised in their relevant field. So that's on page 181 of the full document. The Ministry of Health is not supportive of the EPA's approach, as I read out. I want to say that we had a number of statements of support around this issue, and they're listed in your page 8 there. There's the Centre for Public Health Research from Massey University, the Director, Professor Jeroen Douws, Associate Professor Andrea, and I don't pronounce her name well, Manacher, Dr. Dave McLean, Professor John Potter, who I think is actually also seconded as the Science Advisor to the Ministry of Health, Professor Alistair Woodward from your university here, Christopher Portier, Director, US National Centre for Environmental Health, retired, Professor Philip Joseph, Professor of Law at Canterbury University, whose tome, of Constitutional and Administrative Law of New Zealand, is used by the judges in this country. That aspect is covered in our Chapter 7, which is around the legal part of the EPA meeting the purposes of looking out for the public safety and environmental safety. They are not meeting their purpose, and we have academics that are acknowledging that. Professor Jack Heinemann from Canterbury University, Distinguished Professor Bruce Bagley from University of Auckland here, and Dr. Jane Goodall, and the Trustees of Physicians and Scientists for Global Responsibility New Zealand. They've all come out and if we went looking, we would have one hang of a lot more. So we find that is to be a particularly disturbing thing to have the New Zealand EPA going out to find an end point of convenience around something that is of such public concern. We have so many cancers, we have endocrine disruption, we have neurotoxin, toxins, including glyphosate, in abundance, and yet we're getting this approach. So it comes back to councils, and Auckland Council in particular, because of the direction that you've tended to take on the advice from the EPA that it is okay. And I'm here, we're here, Jodie is the principal author of this document, asking that council reconsider and go all out to take glyphosate-based herbicides off your streets and parks. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Stephen. Just to, I know there'll be we'll take a couple of questions. Just to remind people, at next month's presentation, this is where we'll go into detail about our glyphosate reduction policy. So it certainly isn't business as usual. This council agreed to a glyphosate reduction policy, and we'll report back on just how much we have actually reduced and how much further we'll go. Councillor Casey.
It's a question for the report author, if you don't mind, Jodie. In your report, you are calling for an inquiry into the EPA and whether under the current circumstances it is impartial with respect to glyphosate. Could you comment on whether any of the current political parties heading into the election have taken up that call or are going to take up that call?
Thank you, Councillor Casey, Mayor, councillors. They haven't, because this is considered, you know, I guess controversial, but it's not controversial for the Ministry of Health. We also have this domino effect where the Ministry of Health is out here, but we have the other agencies that are working alongside, DHBs, local councils, failing to do this. So the political parties can't. They can't. They're constrained.
I would have to say, before I head out in less than 2 weeks, I intend meeting once again with the Ombudsman's office to have them to do some inquiry. Part of it is to get some of the redactions from the information that I was given, but also for a greater inquiry. I'm hoping there are broader inquiries, but that is the undertaking that in my role, but that will carry on well after I'm out of Parliament as well.
So just a comment really. In the absence of an inquiry, you're asking this council to take a precautionary approach, the same one that Ibrahim Thibault took at the UN Environment, which is we have a moral responsibility to act when there is doubt, not when victims emerge, laws change and loopholes close.
Yeah, I guess the ethical question is, are you going to follow the rules and guidelines of the EPA, which are outdated? They're not considering the full formulation. They're not looking at oxidative stress. Now, we have so much chronic disease in our communities, and oxidative stress is a common cofactor in many of these chronic diseases, including cancer. So there is do we need ethically to follow outdated rules, or do we do what the Ministry of Health says? Because it's rather hubristic to consider that we could do a better job than 17 experts in cancer compared to a retired toxicologist who has no experience in cancer. Well, not the experience in cancer of the IARC members.
Okay, we've got a couple more questions and then we do need to move on. Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You both, Stefan and Jodie, made very clear the limitations of the EPA review. What I'm interested in is how does the IARC review compare to what they did? What is the difference in terms of substance as you see it?
The New Zealand EPA and some other international authorities that have confounded the issue have used predominantly industry science to come to their conclusions, and we have that outlined. We've gone right down into the studies that are in the appendix. You'll see there are more independent studies, but what they used to come to their conclusion was stuff, some of it directly from Monsanto. And I have to say, under the OIA, it's Monsanto that did the big dump of information to our EPA to start with. IARC used independent, peer-reviewed, published material. It did the stuff that is actually available and transparent and open internationally.
It could also be publicly available information that was held with governments. And so in contrast, the EPA used industry studies. Now, for a long time, industries have been permitted to supply unpublished studies that are not available to public health interests to look at. And as a result, you can't see their data. It's not available. Therefore, the IARC is that gold standard in public health because everyone can see it and everyone can cross-reference it. It's impeccable.
Okay, and there's some very good IARC information available on the web. I suggest people read it and also read through the list 2A of possible carcinogens. It's very interesting.
Actually, Councillor Hulse, you've made a wonderful remark that makes me realise often when people talk about probable carcinogens, sorry, I'm a bit close, probable carcinogens, they discuss things, the things that are similar possibly on that level as glyphosate. So they might talk about night shift or wine or coffee as probable carcinogens. But we must remember that children are exposed to glyphosate. They're not exposed to coffee or wine or night shift. So we must take due care, and this is why we ask very earnestly that Auckland Council take the precautionary principle into account. This is regular exposures that we need our children to avoid.
I would add that the material from the EPA that you've repeated just now, Dr. Jacqueline Roweth, the science advisor for the EPA, on record comes out and says that. She also is totally contradictory, and the scientists that have supported us here have done a blog into the Otago University's public health expert blog site, challenging that. And the fact that she contradicted herself, supported IARC, and then supported the EPA's report, and is saying that New Zealanders aren't exposed to it to the levels they're talking about. There is absolutely no monitoring, and we are exposed to a lot of glyphosate, increasing amounts of glyphosate. So Jacqueline Roweth and the EPA trotting that out is very, very disturbing. So I just read it and the caution that it needs to be taken.
Okay, we'll take one more quick question, and please do make them questions, Councillor Newman, and then I would like us to pick up... sorry, Councillor Walker. Remember, we can go into this in detail next month. We have 8 hours of meeting ahead of us now. Councillor Newman.
Stefan, thank you. At the heart of the argument appears to be the statement that there's a causal link between glyphosate as a carcinogenic precursor to cancer, and that the EPA in New Zealand has adopted a permissive approach based on industry science, not considering peer review, etc., which is a pretty bold statement. So I'm wondering, as an MP, what have been the select committee processes through, for example, estimates, to really challenge the EPA around the application of the science that it applies to this matter, because this goes to the heart of professional integrity.
Exactly. And I have had the privilege, as a Member of Parliament, to have the EPA be on a select committee for the annual review of the EPA, and both having the chair and the relatively recently appointed chief executive, who was just in 2 months when this was not ours was commissioned, when Wayne Temple's one was commissioned. They say that they were looking at the weight of evidence and will carefully watch overseas changes. The weight of evidence they mean is, it would appear to be the industry led science, unfortunately, because this is what we've done here. We've gone through that absolutely carefully on what their report is, And the science, you won't see anything else as well referenced, and those references have been checked by a cancer expert on that. EPA is not doing that. They do appear to lack integrity in their processes, and that's what some of the challenges will be that will be coming to them.
And to be honest, they also lack the resources. So what,
Yes,
it doesn't
that's
make sense
I'm
to
just
move
going
aside.
to move this in.
Have I answered your
Councillors, we
question? I
will-
may have
Yep.
missed the part.
Councillor Newman, next month we will have the chance to go into this in more detail. Finally, Councillor Walker.
Sure. Just got a question around the precautionary principle and about evidence, and I haven't read the complete report, but from the perspective of our council, given that we're obviously charged with looking after people, children and others, in an instance where we know that people have been affected because previous councils had medical evidence from people affected by glyphosate, and we know that there are levels of glyphosate in breast milk, in urine, in blood.
Councillor Walker, we really do need that question.
Has that context been considered in your report? Because obviously we're talking about an urban setting where we are effectively spraying this toxin around an environment that people are in as compared to the countryside or the like.
Yeah, it hasn't been looked at properly, and I'll get Jodie to answer that question in part. One thing I have to say that unfortunately our Ministry of Health, that you would think would be the real agency to be looking at that, in front of Select Committee again, Councillor Newman might be interested, the head of the Ministry of Health, who looked behind at his staff to ask, well, how did we deal with the IARC response? And they said they rely on the EPA for the risk hazard analysis, unfortunately. And then they've got that cascade that Jodie was talking about, the DHBs, and then you look into the DHB for good advice, and it cascades from the EPA. But in terms of the precautionary approach and endocrine disruption and all of that.
So Europe is looking at the precautionary principle, and I submit that we should be looking at European decisions. They're moving faster than us, and as a result, many countries in Europe have pulled back on glyphosate. They've pulled back on POEA in the ingredient, which can make the mixture more toxic. We significantly look to the WHO and FAO for decisions on toxicity of glyphosate. They do not apply the precautionary principle. New Zealand needs to start considering the public interest and the greater risk for children more. And then we also must understand that when we have situations such as the Hunua Dam closure 3 times in 3 years because of agrochemical, glyphosate and metsulfuron runoff, this is a direct cost to taxpayers. The purchase of the forestry contract is a direct cost to taxpayers because that is glyphosate, and that is the EPA not pulling back on a toxic chemical, and then it's potentially exposed to residents. So the EPA is not considering second, third order risk and the externalities of this agrochemical.
All right, thank you. I'm going to call it quits there, and I'm sure we'll have the chance to deal with some of the issues
Thank you.
raised.
Okay, I won't be here
So-
on the 17th.
Thank you,
I'm dedicated to being with my
I'll-
family, but I will also ask you to note that Christchurch has taken the precautionary approach and taken it out of public places. So thank you very much.
And
Thank you,
I'm sure-
councillors.
I'm
Kia ora
sure you'll
tātou.
be really interested to see the report back on our reduction process. So I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried.
We are very grateful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I also just want to note, sorry, my omission. Councillor Clow is on council business, and he'll be here as soon as he can. So if we can just add him into the apologies for lateness. Now, moving on to our next presentation, which is the Stormwater Coalition. I'd like to warmly welcome Bronwyn Turner and your team. Welcome, Bronwyn, and we've got your presentation. And if you just want to introduce Dirk and the team, it would be great.
Do I need to press? No, good.
No, you just speak.
Miranda, good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee, for giving us this time to come and talk with you this morning. I'd like to introduce, well, I'm Bronwyn Turner with the Manukau Harbour Restoration Society, and with me are David Abbott and Dirk Hudig, who are with the Stop Auckland Sewage Overflow Coalition. And apologies from John McCaffrey, our Te Reo speaker, who unfortunately had to leave and catch a flight to Wellington. We're representing a number of community groups that are focused on improving the stormwater and water quality on the isthmus. You can find a list of all those groups in the appendix. And so we have a perspective of both the Waitemata harbours and the Manukau harbour. We're going to this morning quickly cover some of the current situation on the isthmus, and then talk briefly about our vision for improving water quality, and then we have a few requests to make of council. As most of you know, in most of central Auckland, we have either a situation of a soakage system or a combined system where wastewater and stormwater are mixed. In the combined system, there's simply not the capacity to be able to handle the large volumes of stormwater that we're now getting in our rain system. The soakage system, which is based on an underground aquifer, is becoming polluted by runoff from the stormwater, and in many areas it's just simply not functioning, and in those areas of the city there just simply isn't an alternative stormwater system. So during storms, and March was a good example, we have a situation where we've got raw sewage that's coming up into our creeks and streams, also into our parks and into private property as well. What we're finding also is that it's coming straight out onto our beaches, and this is going to become an issue in summer with the new monitoring system for the water quality of our beaches, and people are going to be even more aware of the issues that we have of raw sewage coming out onto the beaches and making it unsafe for swimming and also unsafe for food gathering. Also, the volume of stormwater that we're getting far exceeds the capacity of the treatment plant at Mangere to be able to handle that. So we're getting more and more instances of steps in the treatment process being bypassed. So partially treated effluent is going into the Manukau harbour. And it's not a case of, oh, it's diluted, so that's not an issue for the harbour. The issue is that it is still effluent, and the harbour has to then treat it. So it's using the oxygen that should be going to sustaining the harbour, it's using it to treat effluent. As you can understand, the residents in central Auckland find this situation unacceptable. We're concerned that other people, when we get into summer, they'll also find it unacceptable when they find that they're being warned not to swim in our inner city beaches. We know that the Central Interceptor is going to help with some of these problems, but it's not going to eliminate the problems altogether. And as we move into intensification, there'll be a greater amount of the surface area in the isthmus will be impermeable, so no longer will we be able to rely on that soakage going through to the aquifer, and we'll get even greater flows of stormwater going into the system. However, intensification also gives us the opportunity to make some changes. So as we go in and we replace old sewage pipelines and old stormwater pipelines that need to be replaced anyway or need to be expanded because they need to take increased volumes, that gives us the opportunity to do things differently. If you have a quick look at this map, the purple areas are the areas that I was referring to that are the soakage areas, and those are the areas that have little or no stormwater infrastructure. And the pink areas are those where the wastewater and the stormwater system is combined. And then we have other areas where the system may be separated on private property, but when you get to the street, it's just simply the one system of the combined wastewater and stormwater. So we have a vision of where we'd like to get to. Obviously, Aucklanders want to be proud of their beaches and their streams and their creeks. We'd like to see that we've upgraded the water quality to where we can actually swim and where we can gather food safely. We're looking for a future where the bypasses of the treatment plant are reduced and then overflows into the harbour are reduced. We're really asking you to look forward to creating a stormwater and wastewater system on the Central Isthmus that is of the same quality as we're requiring be built in the greenfields areas. This doesn't mean it is the same, we're just asking that it be of the same quality. And in fact, we're asking for council to start looking at solutions perhaps a little bit differently. One of the things we feel strongly about is that we need to treat the stormwater so that we're reducing the heavy metals and the sediment that's going into our harbours and into our creeks and streams. We'd like to be able to get to a point where we can actually reintroduce wildlife into those creeks and streams. And hopefully, those of us looking at the harbours as well would like to see fish stocks replenished. We also would like to move towards a situation where all the council teams, whether it's Healthy Waters or Auckland Transport or Water Care, are all working together for the good of Auckland and for improving the ecological situation and reducing the health risks, the human health risks. And we're really also asking that Auckland Council teams work closely with the community and with mana whenua on not just asking us to fund things, but getting us engaged at the very beginning so that we can work through on the options and then work through on helping figure out what some acceptable funding solutions are as well. So that leads me into our requests of you. Obviously, we're asking you to take some major steps forward on really addressing these environmental conditions, the degradation that we have on the Central Isthmus, and the human health risks, because we have some real human health risks when we have raw sewage going into our creeks and into our harbours. And there are two big vehicles, obviously, where we'd like to see this addressed, and the first is in the Auckland Plan refresh, and the second is in the 10-year long-term plan. Again, as I said before, we're really asking you to engage the community now, because we can really help as you move into the Auckland Plan and as you move into the long-term plan. We can help if we're supporting you with those funding options. Then we can be voices out in the community saying, look, we've gone through the options, we understand why these options are being chosen, we understand why this funding is being selected, but we need to come along with you as you go through those options. So that's both in now as you're doing the work around the Central Isthmus, but also as you're getting into the Auckland Plan refresh and into the long-term plan. We also see the potential for starting now with some projects, both fixing some of these real knotty problems that we have, like the combined system, but also looking at how do we do some innovative pilot projects. There are, for example, there are 2 special housing areas that Housing New Zealand is pursuing in Roskill South and also in Waterview. This gives us the opportunity to perhaps learn from Stonefields and look at how could we do some innovative stormwater or wastewater treatment systems in those areas that both work environmentally but also are financially sustainable. Why in Waiuku, Water Care is applying for a discharge consent there to discharge the effluent, the treated effluent from development on that southern shore. They're going to do a great job in terms of the quality of that effluent, but we're looking at it and saying, you know, maybe we could look at how do you reuse that effluent. Maybe we could talk with New Zealand Steel, for instance. They need a huge quantity of water as part of their processes. Shouldn't we be looking at this effluent, instead of it going into the harbour, have it go and be used at the steel mill? It reduces the flows to the harbour, but it also reduces the demand of what we put onto our freshwater system and what we take from the Waikato River. And certainly at Cox's Creek and Chamberlain Park, there are opportunities there for pilot projects around stormwater and really treating the stormwater so that we are raising the quality of that stormwater before it goes into the streams and out into the harbour. So put simply, we're really asking you to embark on a plan to rebuild the stormwater system in central Auckland, in the central isthmus. We're asking for that to be basically a system that's separate from the wastewater system. We're asking for you to look at having a dedicated funding stream. And so you have a project that's been laid out to the community with a funding stream, that is located in the long-term plan. So the residents have some certainty. They know this is how it's going to be funded, and this is when we're going to be dealt with, and so they know that these projects are going to be done over a period of time. We believe that we can start now, and we know that it's going to take 10, 20, maybe even 30 years to get that done. But we have the opportunity with intensification to really work with areas that are going under redevelopment and really make some major improvements in these areas. We're also asking you to deal with water in all of its aspects in the Auckland Plan refresh. We're heartened to see some of the outcomes starting to come into the Auckland Plan refresh, but we want outcomes for drinking water, for stormwater, for wastewater, and most importantly, for the water quality in our streams, our creeks, and our harbours. And we really think that we can get this done. Certainly working with the community, we believe we can do that and make some major steps forward. I'm a little bit slow on driving this, I apologise.
We read ahead.
So I just want to thank you all for your time. We appreciate being able to work particularly with our ward councillors and our committee chairs. And we also want to say, surprisingly, and most of you who know me will be very surprised to hear this come from my mouth, but we've seen a real change in water care and in how water care is working with the community and how they're approaching problems. We want to encourage them to keep on with that. Certainly with the Waiuku discharge consent, there's been a much more collaborative effort working with the community on really trying to understand our issues and trying to address them. So we're really pleased to see how water care is looking at these issues. So we just encourage you to take a quick look at the appendix. There's more detail there. Lots of the pages are actually photographs, so they're easy to look at and give you a sense of what we're dealing with now and where we'd like to go. Thank you very much.
Bronwyn, thank you so much to you and Dave and Dirk. You will be very pleased, I think, to hear the next couple of presentations and the next few agenda items, which it's not often we get a presentation from the community and we go, you are utterly on trend, because you will hear a lot of your issues addressed. I'm sure there'll be a couple of questions, but members acknowledging that we have an entire morning devoted to water and we will be covering this. Member Wilcox, kia ora.
Kia ora. Ai, taki kororo kia koe. Ea te kaupapa ki te hakatū i te tahi anō repo kia whakapai i te wai, e rere atu ki te wai tamata. Nā te mea ka kite au i roto i tō haka ahua tinga i roto i te ata nei. I puta ana koutou he kōrero mo te whakawhiti ana patupaerehe ara Meola Creek. E tahi ora mahi i roto i te repo. Engari, e tahi anō wāhi tā koutou?
Have you considered the views of mana whenua for this kaupapa, this area being an ancient crossing for Patupaerehe or the early ancestral guardians for that space in terms of their the aspirations for water quality? Kia ata haere tō reo, Glenn. Kia tai au ta hoki.
Kea koutou te tahi anō wāhi kia hakatū, kia hanga te tahi anō repo.
Is there another? Have you provided an opportunity for mana whenua to have a input into your presentation?
I have to apologise that the Liz Walker, who works extensively on the Miola Creek, has reached out. Unfortunately, she's not able to be here today, but we do know that the next step for us is further engagement, because we need to be very working hand in hand and arm in arm on our approaches on that. So yes, we do recognise that that's the next step we need to take.
Kia ora. Councillor Walker.
Sure. I take your point around the overflows that occur in storm events, and they're not always wet weather flows, sometimes even in dry weather. Would it be helpful if both Auckland Council through Stormwater and also Watercare had signs up in all the locations where we know overflows occur, and I'm talking about sewage? And there are many, many of these around the region. Do you think that people in the community have a right to know where those locations are, given that this is ongoing?
I do think we need to do a much better job of communicating to the public on what really is going on. In the past, we've had a really hard time getting the location of the overflows where sewage is coming out. We're having a hard time actually getting that mapped. I do want to say, though, in the last 6 months, MHRS has identified a couple of places where we've seen raw sewage come out, and we've brought Watercare in and Healthy Waters, and there's been an effort to try to deal with some specific overflow issues. And so we have had some resolution in some very specific areas, but generally, I think, yes, we need to do a much better job of letting the public know, because when it happens, people sense that there's something wrong, because they're out there and they see things floating around in the water and they're going, this isn't right, and it's been very difficult for us to get, the real story on what's going on. So the more people know, the better, I think.
I mean, my understanding is that both Watercare and Council already know, because
Councillor
there's
Walker.
a multiplicity of complaints that go back decades and everything's logged.
Councillor Walker, good questions. Let's go into that when we get into our Safe Swim, because that's exactly what the whole Safe Swim program's about. I've got Councillor Fletcher, Councillor Casey, Councillor Cashmore. So, Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Bronwyn. A wonderful presentation, and I think it's commendable. So many groups have come together in a public-spirited way in order that we can finally be effective on this absolute blight on our city and our region. I wonder if you could just outline the nature of the groups. Perhaps Mr. Abbott could explain just how extensive the groups that we have are, and whether or not you've had the opportunity for some early consultation on the Auckland Plan refresh, given the extensive representation that you now have.
Yes. Thank you, Councillor Fletcher, Councillor House, Mayor and other councillors. The groups in front who prepared or worked on this presentation really are three major groups. Bronwyn represents the Manukau Harbour Restoration Society. John McCaffrey, who was here but had to leave because of a flight need, represents today the Steps St Luke's Environmental Protection Society. And Dirk Hudick and I represent the Stop Auckland Sewage Overflows Coalition.
Excuse me.
The MHRS and STEPS are probably well known to a number of you, because they've been involved in matters of environmental protection in their areas now for several years. In fact, many years, I think, in the case of MHRS. The coalition, SASOC, I'll just call that for short, the acronym, was only formed this year, and it really was trying to bring together groups that, community groups that fringe the Waitemata. And so far we have either directly fringe it or just are inland in the Central Isthmus. But the, if you like, the, yes, page 13 of the presentation, and in the appendix area will give you a complete list. I echo Bronwyn's comments that we've still to do more in terms of particularly bringing in iwi involvement, and that is something that we will be doing as part of moving into specific representations, hopefully for the long-term plan. ZASOC has already been given stakeholder status for representation on the key stakeholder status, or I think it's now called regional stakeholder status for the long-term plan, and we will be using that in combination with the other two organisations. May I just add, though, although we're the people who are working specifically on this project, I have absolutely no doubt that there are an awful lot of people, a large number of other organisations and groups within the Auckland region who are doing some wonderful work in this field, and if there was more time, I'm sure they would be brought in and would willingly come in and be involved. And I think that's the thing that I want to just comment on now, which is that and I think all of us here today are saying to you as the Environmental Committee, we'd love to see you take a real role and step forward as leaders of an initiative that really needs to be taken for Auckland. Where I'm really encouraged, and I think we all are very encouraged to hear that water items now are you've got two significant ones on the agenda for today's meeting. And that's great. But I think the major message I want to just leave you with on this is that we hope that you and Council generally will have the courage to deal with an issue that's been in and around the Auckland Isthmus now for decades. This is the time you people it's come to the surface. It's not something that was necessarily going to be as obvious as transport or housing, big issues. We're not trying to be saying this is prioritised to them. We're saying this is another significant issue. And I know the Mayor's taken that on board and has that in his thinking. But I want you all to take the courage to say we're really going to grapple with this now. We're going to put it into the Auckland plan. We're going to put it into the 10-year plan. And we're going to have a beginning and an end that the public of Auckland can see and will grapple with. Now, if you do that, I am absolutely confident that once the public knows of the extent of the issues and the possibilities that can come out of a good presentation and good programs, the public will come in behind you. I'm really confident of that, and I hope that that was a view that you can come to. So I will finish by welcoming the attention that this is given, the attention that you, the committee, has allowed it, and the attention I hope that the council as a whole will give it, and say we will be here working with you as much as we can. As I have to say that we are getting great assistance from council's own stormwater group and water care in trying to tackle a problem that is here for all Auckland. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm sure that message is being heard loud and clear. I've got Councillor Casey, then Councillor Cashmore, and then we'll move on. Councillor Casey.
Dick and David and Bronwyn, thank you for your coalition and thank you for working in partnership with the Council on Water Care. It's great to hear good things about water care because like you, I think there is a change in the air and I'm really hopeful about that. But I think the light came on for most councillors when water care was before us to tell us that the multi-million-dollar central interceptor will only solve 80% of the problems. Yeah. The other 20% will be solved by this council, water care, and you guys. So I'm hoping that water care will codify that relationship with yourself and your member groups because they're calling out for that. The ideas are on the ground. As you've noticed, the trials are something that you would put forward that we would accept. So I just want to say thank you for your part in this. Councillor Cashmore.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Team Bronwyn, for your presentation. It's timely, and we've been waiting. I would say it's not decades, it's generations for this tardiness to be solved. Two questions. First of all, the Waiuku and Tuakau plants, funded by Watercare, thick end of $500 million. If they were taken to the umpteenth stage, the water would be good enough to go back into the aquifer. In your mind, have you done any analysis on the option of that being a cost-effective one? That's the first question.
Councillor Cashmore, we've talked with Watercare and we've also talked with Port New Zealand, and our desire was that yes, it would be used and to refresh the aquifer. And I believe that Watercare is going to be treating the water up to a standard that basically is at that standard. But our understanding of the issue is that the purchases of food grown that's been irrigated by water coming from the aquifer, it's the purchases of the food that are saying you can't use treated effluent to irrigate food growth. And so that's the problem that we've got. Our understanding is people like McDonald's are saying, you can't do that. We will not buy your products. So we have an issue where we've got to get around that first before we can actually use that water to refresh the aquifer. So we understand the issues, well, at least we understand the beginnings of the issues around there, and we certainly would like to work on addressing that, because it makes a lot of sense to reuse the water for the food growers that are in that area. And certainly we're distressed, from a Manukau Harbour standpoint, we're distressed to hear things that, well, the next round of water that's going to be taken is going to be taking it from the food growers. So we're very motivated then to look at how do we use water efficiently so that we're both reducing how much we're taking, but then also reducing how much we're putting into our streams and harbours. So, sorry, long answer to your short question.
It's a good thing we better not go and buy McDonald's in London, New York, Paris, Rome, or any other major city.
Or in Hamilton or Cambridge, because that's what's going on in the Waikato River. But unfortunately, it's around the aquifer that it's the issue.
Second question might be a little bit theoretical, and that is, we've been given some rough costings to do the intercept and piping work. It's in excess of $1 billion. And have your team of organisations thought of any funding methods other than just plain rates to achieve that result?
I have to be really careful on this answer because we have actually, behind closed doors, we have some wrestling matches around that. I think that where we are at the moment is that we really want to sit down with Council and with Watercare and understand what some of the options are, and then work through for us what the implications might be. So issues around equity and who's being asked to pay for things that they've already paid for and things like that, and how the costs are spread across Auckland. It's really a conversation that we need to have as an ongoing conversation so we can understand the implications, and then maybe we can communicate to Council and Watercare also some of the sensitivities of residents and ratepayers. So I think we're at the beginning of that dialogue.
Excellent.
Thank you for your thoughtfulness.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I will move that that Bronwyn and the group be thanked, and seconded Councillor Fletcher. And I'm also going to make the point, I've met with the group, and I'm very, very keen that as we embark on the very big, complex challenge of our water strategy, that this be one of our key organisations to be a touchstone group to do exactly what Bronwyn has suggested, because the issue of water is a hell of a lot bigger than the interceptor, and touching on our regional food strategy and our water quality in our 3 harbours, we need wise heads to help guide us through that. So I'll put the thank you recommendation. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'll now move.